This is what you can do about taking control of your health. A podcast for people interested in exploring why we get sick, as well as in learning how to create bodies that are healthy, strong, fit, and disease resistant. I am Sean McClendon. I'm your host. I'm a certified personal trainer, an author, and a health and fitness enthusiast. Thank you for joining me today. I apologize for my voice. I did a little workout not too long ago, and my body is still kind of recovering from breathing hard and all that kind of stuff. But hey, we're gonna get it in anyhow, you know. But before we get into it, excuse me, my featured book for this podcast is my book called 8 Weeks to Transform Your Diet and Your Health. So you can have the best exercise routine in the world, but if your diet is off, one thing is guaranteed: you will not see results. So in my book, 8 Weeks to Transform Your Diet and Your Health, actually it's a fat loss workbook. In it, I've created an easy to follow set of eating habits for you to adopt over 8 weeks to boost your health, promote fat loss, and get the most out of your exercise regimen. So when you finish this 8 weeks workbook, you will finally know how to eat to get results. Okay, so make sure you get your copy. Look in the description to buy the book where it is found online. It's not on Amazon. It's on a different platform called Lulu. But yeah, get your copy. Okay, I promise you, it'll help you. All right. So in today's episode, we're going to explore a topic that has become of particular interest to me in the past probably couple of years. And it is, where does this whole idea of 3 or more meals a day kind of originate from? Where does it stem from? Okay. So, you know, if you're like me, and that's probably everybody at this stage, you've kind of grown up with the idea of 3 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You know, breakfast is the morning meal, lunch is a noontime meal that might be a little lighter, and then dinner is an evening time meal that could be anywhere from about 6 o'clock to, I don't know, 9, 10, depending on what family you come from, how you guys do things. But the thing you might be interested in learning is that this whole idea of eating 3 meals a day, or even more recently, 4 or 5 meals a day. But let me back up. Really, the whole 3 meals a day concept is not really like it's kind of a Western thing. It's a Western thing that's only been around, I think, for really like the past, since about the 1700s. And I'm happy to explain this because I believe what it's going to cause you to do is it's going to challenge the way you think about eating. It's going to show you perhaps one of the reasons why we deal with some of the health problems we deal with, namely obesity and being overweight, digestive system problems. Because in a nutshell, we might be eating too often. Okay. And I'll say this, and I'll get into all the notes that I took that I wanted to share in this episode. You know, we learned about 3 meals a day growing up, if you were like me. And then maybe around the time I was like a teenager, you know, you start hearing people talk about eating, or at least I started hearing people talking about eating 4 or 5 meals a day, 6 meals a day, 7 meals a day, depending on, you know, to balance your blood sugar and all those different type of things, you know, to like, if you're somebody who's trying to gain muscle, to like spread out so you can eat more calories. But the truth is, if you look at the history of how mankind has lived and how food has traditionally been available, and see how we've kind of grown into agricultural, industrialized society where food is very, very plentiful, we might be eating too often. And the thing is, it's like that seems okay until you understand that the way that our bodies are shaped up, your digestive system requires rest. Now, keep in mind, we're not even really talking so much about the content of meals. Obviously, you know, we want to be eating meals that are more whole food and little to no junk food and all that kind of stuff. But right now we're talking about the frequency of meals and the history of how we've gotten to where we are now. Because where we are now, breakfast, lunch, and dinner and beyond, is a relatively recent phenomenon that was clearly shaped by a few key events. So let me go ahead and get into this because I want to give you guys the details. Make sure you share this episode because I think it's going to help a lot of people kind of understand this eating thing a little bit better, and perhaps kind of like start to think about eating in ways that make more sense for our physiology, for the human body. All right, so this information I got here was from a website, emetabolic.com. And again, we're talking about where did this whole idea of 3 meals a day originate from? So apparently European settlers who came over to places like here in America started to eat 3 meals a day, particularly settlers who had achieved financial prosperity. Now, the reason why that's important is because people who were able to eat more often were people who had a certain level of wealth, which meant that they had the ability to purchase more food, to eat more. Whereas, it was more typical for a person who was of not as much means to eat fewer times a day. And if I'm not mistaken, and we'll get into it, like lunchtime, not so much of breakfast, but mainly like a big meal around what we now call lunchtime. But let me not get ahead of myself. So European settlers who had achieved financial prosperity. Whereas whenever they came over, the Native Americans, in contrast, according to this site, more so ate intuitively, ate when they were hungry, not necessarily in a prescribed manner with separate meals a day. So it might look more so like a grazing type of way of eating. Now, they didn't give any details as far as like what time of day they would start to eat or when they would stop eating, but that's what they said. They more so kind of grazed. All right. So this other information I got here was from daily.jstore.org. And check this out. So from the Industrial Revolution is kind of where this 3 meals a day thing came from. And now this is something I've actually researched before. So check this out. So the Industrial Revolution was a time kind of like, I think latter 1700s, 1800s for sure, perhaps even into the 1900s a bit, when society starts to be shaped around industry, factories and things like that, when things start to be more mass produced and standardized and whatnot. And so people began to work in factories more. Now, this has had a profound effect on human history in so many aspects, which I had to be careful to not talk about too many of them because this is a podcast about health and fitness. But it's important to note that a lot of things change in a major way with the way that humans live lives due to the Industrial Revolution. So literally around the Industrial Revolution, life began to be, instead of being formed around the individual, it began to be more so formed around work. Society began to be shaped around work and people working in factories. So what people would do is they would, either put a little bit of lunch, quote, lunch in their pockets, like a little sandwich, some bread or something like that to eat during the day. Or they would come back home for a quick lunch. Now, it's important to note that dinner used to be the meal that was around 11, 12 o'clock. Okay. There was no such thing as lunch. And so what that meant was dinner was a time when the family came together and ate the big meal of the day. Okay. So because everything began to be shaped around factory work and all of this kind of stuff, people could no longer eat that meal, that family meal, that big meal in the middle of the day like that. So because they would be working, they would be going to work in a factory or something like that. So literally what they would do is pack like some sort of small little meal, small snack, which eventually began to be called lunch. And they would eat that around that time. And then dinner got pushed into the evening time when everybody got home. Parents, kids, kids might be at school or they may even be at work. Okay. And so it was when everybody finally got back home and they would eat whatever big meal later on in the day. Okay. So again, as I'm talking about this, just really kind of think about how we do now, how it's related to how things changed around the Industrial Revolution and how things used to be before the Industrial Revolution, apparently. Now, keep in mind also that we're talking about a Western kind of thing, which kind of has spread around the world. But this is kind of like a thing that kind of originated in the West, not necessarily associated per se with other culture. All right, so yeah, so up until about 1800, the year 1800, the English people they ate 2 instead of 3 meals a day. And again, so I don't think breakfast was really one of those main meals, but lunch was one for sure, and perhaps like a light meal in the evening, which was I think that was the meal termed as a supper. But again, as I said before from the other site, people who were eating more of 3 meals a day were people who tended to be more prosperous and things like that. All right. Yeah, so I already said that the big dinner could no longer be shared among family around 11 because life centered around factory work, not necessarily around the family or the individual, but around working for somebody. Okay. All right. So this information I got here is from BBC.com. And check this out. So ancient Romans ate 1 meal a day around noon. Again, the big meal of the day was around noon. And they actually frowned upon breakfast. Breakfast was scorned. And they thought that it was better and even more, you were perhaps a better person if you didn't eat breakfast, if you ate only 1 meal a day, which is interesting. And I've noticed that this whole OMAD, 1 meal a day thing is really kind of picking up steam again. I was watching a video just the other day of a guy who was actually Muslim, and he was talking about eating 1 meal a day. But again, the thing to understand, and I can't wait to talk about this whole topic a little bit more targeted, like around intermittent fasting and fasting in general, because of the health implications. But I don't want to get too much into that this episode. But what I'm trying to say is a lot of this stuff was stuff that people have done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So breakfast began to appear on the tables of wealthy English in the 17th century. So again, this is kind of like what we were talking about a little bit earlier with the wealthier people eating 3 meals a day. So breakfast began to appear for laborers, the people who were like working factory jobs, and due to the Industrial Revolution. And the purpose of breakfast was to sustain people for work. So you see what I'm saying? How these extra meals and stuff, or the change in time of meals, was because of factory work and its effect on society. Okay, so that's when breakfast began to appear for labor, the working class. Okay, to help them to work, to have a little more energy to work. Now, keep in mind, again, society was not quite like it is now. So 1, you have an extra meal added. 2, you have the fact that society was a lot more labor, like physical labor, oriented versus now when we are a lot less likely to be moving on our jobs. So think about the implications of that. So many things, but let me continue. Then now this was at least in UK area. Breakfast was touted in the 1920s and the 1930s by the government as, quote, the most important meal of the day. So that's something that we talk about a lot in modern day. But the thing to consider is that at least, and I don't know exactly how it's been here in America, but at least in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 1930s, the government in Europe, the government in England, was touting breakfast as the most important meal of the day. Okay, so that was from a government platform that was being said. So we say that here in America as well. But like I said, even now with the intermittent fasting movement and whatnot, I think people are kind of starting to kind of look back at how things used to be and kind of change their minds about that. Another thing is artificial light played a part in shifting dinner later for the wealthier people. So light bulbs and stuff like that. And producing a lunchtime, which was a small, quick snack between meals. So literally having light bulbs and stuff like that had a huge effect. Because think about it. Dinner time will be the later meal. Supper time, will be a later meal that was eaten probably before the sun went down. But when we got light bulbs and then dinner got shifted further because of industry work and the family came together after work and whatnot, they could eat meals later and later because of light bulbs. Okay. Now light bulbs are great, but again, understand the implications of these type of developments. Okay. And then this also produced lunchtime, which was a small, quick snack between meals. All right. So this next information I got was from a different site, food-links.com. One thing, because a lot of the information that I was able to find was based on Western culture, Europe, England, America, that type of deal. And it's huge influence on the way that things are seen these days. But being an African American, of course, I was wondering, okay, so like, what is the history of how African people ate? And I'm also even curious about the history of meal times for other cultures, Middle Eastern cultures and Indian cultures and, Native American cultures, even though we got a little information on that, Asian culture and whatnot. But this is what I found. Now, this wasn't necessarily from like history, but this site that I found, it said that rural Africans typically eat one main meal a day. And that's, I think, modern day. And that's usually sometime in the evening. And they may drink coffee or tea or milk or curds like in the morning for like a small, light morning meal. And then throughout the day, just snack on nuts and seeds. Again, so just kind of envision that. So like maybe some coffee or tea or milk or something like that early in the morning for like a little morning meal, a light meal, followed by just throughout the day, nuts and seeds as needed. And then maybe some fruit, just kind of as snacks. And then in the evening, sometime one big meal. All right. So that said, that's kind of all the information I kind of want to share here because I really want to give you some food for thought. Perhaps now we can kind of understand a little bit more that this 3 meals a day thing is not necessarily how it's been. And that's been because of the Industrial Revolution, because of the development of artificial light, because of wealth and how wealthy people were able to buy more food, the availability of food and all that type of thing. What I hope to get into in the future is the evidence, essentially, in science and even based on how people have eaten in the past, that the digestive system needs rest, and that this whole idea of eating 3, 4, 5, 6 plus meals a day is actually not necessarily the best thing for the human body because of the fact that the digestive system needs rest. Oh man, there's so much I can get into on that. But let me just give you a few of the questions that I thought about as I was preparing for this podcast. One is eating 3 meals a day really necessary? So, we've been told 2,000 calories a day for the average adult. I think that's 150 pound white male, I think is what that's based on. But anyway, the different percentages of this vitamin and this mineral and whatnot. So, but when I've considered that people in the past, especially before the Industrial Revolution, maybe even ate only one main meal a day, the question I have is, what really are our nutritional requirements if one were to try to standardize those? It's kind of hard to do that because there is no standard human. But what actually do we need? Okay. The other question I had is, what are other traditional meal times? I kind of asked that. A lot of what we talked about has been based on European culture. But what about African culture? What about Indian, Asian, Native American, Middle Eastern cultures? what are other traditional meal times? How have people traditionally eaten? And even the other day, I was watching this video, and it was I think a guy from Nepal, I want to say, I think, and he's talking about how eating one meal a day was something that had been practiced in their culture for thousands of years. You know, so again, it kind of seems like this eating less frequently is something that has been common across across the world. Now, before I go into this next question that I have in my mind that I hope to explore later, keep in mind we're not talking about starvation now. Starvation, you know, like anorexia and things like that, those are things that, you know, you really need to get some real like help, psychological kind of like deep work so that you can kind of uncover unhealthy habits and, you know, traumas and whatnot so that you can kind of like grow and eat healthier, or treat your body in a healthy manner. But that said, it's still important to understand that 3 meals a day is probably more than we need. Okay. The other question I had is our frequent eating a contributor to high levels of lifestyle disease in America? Could it be that us eating 3+ meals a day has been making it harder for us to keep a normal weight? Could it be that eating 3 meals a day plus is contributing to our diabetes and our high blood pressure? I had a fasting experience where after 3 days of water only fasting, like my blood pressure had dropped a lot. And I mean, I didn't really deal with high blood pressure, but my point is, giving your digestive system uses a lot of energy, a whole lot of energy. And you may have experienced whenever you kind of feel like your heart kind of beating harder after a meal, it's because all that blood that your digestive system requires in that moment. But like how much you eat has an effect on your blood pressure as well, if you had ever considered that. The other question I have is, what are our actual macro and micronutrient needs? Macro being like calories, micro being like vitamins and minerals and things like that. What do we actually need? And is the standard that's on the back of our labels, is that really sufficient or even necessary? And then finally, you know, questions about intermittent fasting, 1 meal a day, 2 meals a day, and all these different kind of fad protocols that are popular today, but which actually appear to have a basis in past life, past human life, past cultures. Okay, very exciting stuff. I encourage you. I hope this is like a kickstart for you to do your own research and to stay tuned to this podcast, because I'm going to explore this more in the future. But consider that. Consider the fact that your body, that you may not really need to eat over 3 times a day. Do your own research. You know, make sure that you consult your doctor and all that type of good stuff. But really understand that the way we eat and how often we eat and the times we eat are a social construct, a Western social construct that probably has room for change, especially if you're one who really wants to take control of your health. Okay. All right. So let's let that be it, because I could keep on going on and on. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, share it. Make sure you like this episode. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you get your copy of my book, 8 Weeks to Transform Your Diet and Your Health, with the description that you see below the this video. And yeah, I would love to hear from you about what this episode made you think about and all that type of good stuff. Don't forget to share it. Don't keep the information to yourself. All right. Thank you. And remember, your doctor is not responsible for your health. You are. God bless you.